Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, V Gates, hola, bonjour, mushi mushi, to all the international listeners, to this, another episode of Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. Let's get right to the first of your many fascinating queries. David Jordan, I was thinking about how positive stories about pioneers and conquistadors are a genre we may never see again, and it's a shame. Do you have any interest in writing stories about these subjects? Yeah, with your diversity, equity, and inclusion, basically translates to excluding white people, and diversity seems to be sans any kind of history about white people or Europeans or whatever, and especially shown in any kind of positive light. And the conquistadors, they get a bad rap. um, yeah, they did some terrible things, but who didn't back in the day? As Mel Brooks refers to all history when things were rotten, cruelty, barbarism, genocide. These were all norms across the globe. No culture was free of them. Hopefully we're still not free of them, are we? Slavery, genocide, uh, ethnic cleansing, things like that, is still going on today in many parts of the world. Um, Luckily here, it's simply erasing people through censorship rather than actual murder. Anyway, the conquistadors get a bad rap. I think the conquistadors were heroes simply because they took down the Aztecs, which was one sick society. And so many people say, well, conquistadors had no right to come in and do that. But apparently, all of the neighboring Native American tribes settled around the Aztecs were more than happy to join the conquistadors in their struggle to take down the Aztecs, because they had no use for the Aztecs either. So, it's basically a serial killing culture, based on, blood magic and murder. And when your enemy is wearing human skin, it's kind of an indicator, you're on the right side. But yeah, I'd love to write a story about this. And there's some, epic stuff here in the battle between the Spanish conquistadors and the Aztecs. The Night of Sorrows and all the rest of it. There's some fantastic stuff there. And, but like I say, and like you indicate, uh, there's a move amongst a minority of a minority of a minority within our culture to sort of rewrite history, so that people of the Caucasian persuasion are always the bad guys, and history is really not about good guys and bad guys. But in the case of the conquistadors versus the Aztecs, I think it's pretty clear cut who was on the side of the angels. I certainly think that Mexico, as bad a shape as it is in now with the cartels, probably be even worse if the Aztecs were the dominant culture from then till now. But yeah, like you said, but I see an end to this woke effort to change history or alter history or retell history from another light. Same thing with the pioneers. So often, the expansion westward is shown as, genocide against Native Americans and everything else. But these genocides were not committed by the pioneers. They were a matter of government policy. This was not necessarily a clash of cultures. The policy of the United States government for quite a long time was the virtual or actual extinction of the Native Americans. They were seen as troublesome. They were seen as in the way. I think it was. I don't want to apply this quote to someone who didn't actually say it, but one ranking general was heard to say, "The only good Indian is a dead Indian," and that if you read about the time period, that was the government's policy, to get rid of the Indians, or corral them, or make life inconvenient for them, force them off of land that they were used to roaming around on. And in order to facilitate this, our government invited people from all around the world to come here and go west. They said, there's free land. You can go out there on free land. You can farm. You can do whatever the hell you want on this land. It'll be yours. Basically unlimited acreage and open range and all the rest. I mean, this was an incredible opportunity for an awful lot of European immigrants whose, if they had any kind of land holdings, which most of them didn't, were the size of a postage stamp. I mean, they really couldn't prosper under the conditions of, serfdom, let's face it, in Europe. So they came here seeking opportunity. But nobody told them how dangerous it was going to be. Nobody told them that there was a hostile native population who didn't want them there. And so a lot of these pioneers, a lot of our forebears went west kind of ignorant of the dangers. And, it's a tough trip anyway. Disease, exposure, horrible weather conditions, starvation, dying of thirst. All of these things were possible going west, further complicated by, the Lakota Sioux and the Cheyenne, the Comanches, and the Apaches, who would go on, let's face it, murder sprees. They would go on the warpath. They would destroy wagon trains and pioneer settlements because they didn't want them there. Okay, this was a clash of cultures, but one end of the equation wasn't expecting this. They weren't armed up. They weren't, ready to fight because they weren't told that they would have to. They were just sold the bill of goods about, countless acres of, a pastoral setting that they could, raise livestock on or cultivate or whatever. And so they were pretty much the sacrificial lambs. They were the cannon fodder for the Western movement and the settlement of the West as designed by government policy back in Washington. And also, they were used as, an excuse to go to war against the Indians. The latest Indian massacre was, enough reason to send out the army. And enough reason to go to war against the tribes. And if you read a history of this, the tribes in the West, the Plains tribes, the Sioux, the Cheyenne, the rest, they tried to negotiate. They tried to negotiate on good terms. They quickly learned how the white man did business and made offers that were spurned by Washington because Washington didn't want to have an ongoing business relationship with the Native Americans. They just wanted them gone. So, I would certainly write, in both of these areas of history. I find them both fascinating, and I've done extensive reading on both. So yeah, if the opportunity arose, I would leap in with both feet. Rebecca Charland, are there any particular characters or genres that you have not yet had an opportunity to write but wish you could have? If yes, is there a story behind why you've never had the opportunity? Famously or usually or typically I answer, I would love to do a long run on Fantastic Four with Graham Nolan. We know what our first story would be. We know what our first arc would be, and it would be awesome and it would be fun. It's never going to happen, but it's nice to dream. As far as genres, I've written in almost all of them. I've written 2 Westerns under my own name, 2 more under a pseudonym. I'm halfway through a 3rd Western. Obviously, I really like Westerns. I've just published my 12th Levon Cade book. Vigilante justice, guy action kind of stuff. Right up my alley, right in my wheelhouse. I wrote Gomer's, a zombie novel, just to get that out of my system. I had a high concept for a zombie novel, and it was in my head for years, and I finally wrote it. And these are all available. I've written sort of hard-boiled crime. My novel Shrinkage, set in the 1970s, about a shoplifter, petty thief. And I've written the post-apocalyptic stuff, in addition to Gomer's. I wrote a novel of Winterworld, basically tells the origin of Scully, one of the lead characters in my Winterworld comic series. So I've written in those genres. I wrote a vampire novel called Blooded, basically to get a vampire novel out of my system. I'll probably write a werewolf novel someday just to get that out of my system, as soon as I come up with a hook for a werewolf novel. And I've written, some sci-fi, 6 books in the Bad Time series, a time travel series about Army Rangers. Genres I really haven't tackled. I do a straight up historical fiction book. I've got an idea for that that I'd like to work. In fact, I've got 2 historical fiction books, concepts that I'd love to get to someday. And that's probably the last frontier for me, because the amount of research required and everything else. But it looks like I'll be in a position in the next couple of years to have the time to do that kind of research that I think is needed to do a proper historical fiction novel. So I'm going to get to them eventually. I'm determined. As a mark of my determination, I mean, La Gringa, one of my westerns, I had that in my head for 30 years before I wrote it. So I realize I probably don't have 30 years left, but I will get around to my 2 historical novels as soon as I, get a few other projects out of the way. But in any case, yeah, I mean, there's not really another genre I want to tackle. I'd love to go back to some of the genres I've done before and do some more entries in them, particularly hard-boiled crime and Western. So, but excellent question. Thank you so much. And here is your dog, Tika, who you were kind enough to send me a picture of. What a dog. Who's a good girl. Okay. Ian Potash, what are your thoughts on DC's finest line of reprints announced for later this year? They've suggested your Robin line might be in the future, and the announced Batman book will reach your run in a handful of volumes. Yeah, I just learned about this the other day, and yeah, I'm pretty happy about it. I'm happy whenever they reprint my stuff. Not from an ego boost kind of thing, but because there's cash in it for me. DC sends out those quarterly royalty checks, and they're based on how much of your work they've utilized. And I love seeing the reprints. There seems to be quite a few volumes of my stuff being done recently. And I think change in management at DC has prompted them to go back and look at what actually used to sell in the past and think, well, if it's sold in the past, maybe people want to read it again, or maybe people have fond memories of it, or maybe the quality was high enough, it's worth revisiting. But I'm just glad every time they do it from a purely financial standpoint. Ryan Wilson. First off, want to say thank you for producing so much content from the 90s and 2000s that I love. Hey, I'm still writing. Pick something out now. You might still love it. My first question is, during your time at DC and Marvel, how much interaction did you have with other writers to make sure your book would line up with other books? For example, during your Detective Comics, Robin, and Nightwing run at DC, did you have to constantly make sure your characters would be in the right place at the right time to make other Batman titles make sense? Was this more of the job of the editor, assistant editor, group editor, etc.? Rereading No Man's Land, which is my favorite Batman event, I noticed that every title added up perfectly in the timeline, even down to the minute in some cases. Meanwhile, I can't even tell when Batman and Detective Comics take place with one another. I've seen where Grant Morrison, writing the Final Crisis, basically had no contact with the people making the comics to set up to the Final Crisis. How can DC fail at such a high level with their events like this? Is the process always the same? Do you all have meetings to set up an entire year? Does Marvel and DC set up their upcoming series events the same way? No. DC back in the day, it was more highly organized. Marvel was never highly organized. I mean, I went to lunches where they would bring in the writers of a crossover event, and basically it would all be hashed out over lunch, which is no way to do this. And then it'd be written in the Marvel style, which means, I was writing full script, but others were writing Marvel style, which means you'd get sometimes like a 6-paragraph plot line for the issue that you were supposed to follow up on. And there was never enough detail in that plot line. And you have to be very specific about things like locations and costuming and weaponry and things like that when you're doing these things, so that one issue flows into the other without any kind of interruption. And because these issues would end on cliffhangers, the cliffhanger has to look the same in the next issue as it did in the previous one. It has to be in the same setting, same time of day, things like that. Marvel never seemed to care about that kind of stuff. And so you would have this, jarring change in everything, costuming, setting, location, time of day, between the cliffhanger at the end of one issue and the resolution of the cliffhanger at the beginning of the next issue. Very frustrating to work on, but I seem to be the only one frustrated. Everybody else just thought, hey, I got paid. I got my paycheck, so who cares? I've always been more into the quality of the work, the end product. This is the best we could do, and never seemed to be a big concern with a lot of the Marvel editors and freelancers I worked with, sadly. Now, as I said, at DC, it was a whole different ballgame. When we did Batman events, we would be taken away to some resort. This is a particularly large summit, because we see a couple of the artists are here with us. Graham Nolan and Jim Ballant are here. Usually it was just writers, editors, and associate editors. And this was the infamous trip to what we called the Overlook Hotel, where Denny O'Neil said that he and his wife had honeymooned at this place in upstate New York, and it was just fabulous. And we would have such a great time having our retreat there. And we spent 3 days at this place. When we arrived, we found out that it was being renovated, and so we were in one of the very few rooms that wasn't stripped to the studs. and it was kind of a miserable experience. Very much like the Overlook in The Shining, and but we would spend days with you see the whiteboards in the background. There would be multiple whiteboards. I remember a particularly intense summit in the middle of nightfall where there was a minimum of 6 whiteboards just crammed with Jordan Gorfinkel's handwriting, and as we figured out plot lines and cliffhangers and resolutions and setups and payoffs and all the rest of that. And it was it was a complex but fun project. It was hard work, but it was fun too. I mean, and we all played nice together, and we were all on the same page. We all wanted to do the highest quality work that we could, and it was a great place to be, a great time to be working at DC. And this is how the Superman crew who did Death of Superman also worked, and largely all the way up through to No Man's Land. This is how it was done. This was under Denny. Superman crew was doing the same thing under Mike Carlin. In the same sort of feel. Creators who were interested in doing their best work, who were interested in producing a quality product. Working together, making sure it was organized, making sure the reader, had the best entertainment experience possible, created earnestly by people who were very interested in doing that, in bringing them high quality entertainment. Now, when you get to anything crossovers involving Grant Morrison, yes, the rules were like you described. Grant Morrison would send down edicts, and his editors would largely just communicate with the various editors and creators across the line. And very often, even if you were supposed to have a meeting with Grant Morrison, he would send the surrogate instead. He wouldn't actually show up to the meeting. I remember having meetings with crossovers involving Grant Morrison, and he sent Mark Miller instead of himself. and Mark Millar would speak for him. And nothing against Mark, except that he talked very fast and has a very thick accent. And largely, especially when he was younger and super enthusiastic, not that he's not super enthusiastic now, he was, and his accent seemed to be even thicker. He was often very difficult to understand. But really, I like Mark a lot, and I really dig his enthusiasm even to this day. And obviously, hugely successful, probably the most successful comic book writer of our age. But he was sort of Grant Morrison's cat's paw, and we would meet with him instead. And also, Grant Morrison was, most infamously on 1 Million, which I'm not the only writer who has, sleepless nights over the 1 Million crossover, which was a company-wide crossover in which the conceit was that each issue of every title that month would be the 1 millionth issue, as if far, far into the future, all of these titles would have their 1 millionth issue from a still existent DC Comics. And the problem is you had the toxic mix of Grant Morrison with editor Dan Raspler. Dan Raspler, he was running the crossover. He was like the group editor for the crossover. And this is a toxic mix because Dan Raspler was more into office politics and probably the cruelest editor to freelancers I've ever met in my life. If he's listening to this, he's probably proud of of holding this record of being largely despised amongst the freelancer community because he would just make arbitrary changes to things. And normally when you did a crossover, as in 1 Million, you're sent like this 20-page outline of what it is, what the Uber story of the crossover event is. And I'm not going to blame Grant for this. I'm going to blame, first of all, it was Grant Morrison overview. So it was very cosmic, very, dense, very odd. And then you mix in Dan Raspler, who kept he and Grant kept morphing it and changing it as it went along. So we all got this 20-page outline. And then we would get notes. As we were writing our issues, we would get notes. We've changed this, we've changed that, we've changed the name of this character. So you're writing and then having to rewrite according to the changes to the core crossover, and then rewriting and rewriting to the point where you don't know what you're writing anymore. And it wasn't just me. I mean, it was stalwarts. I mean, studs like Dan Jurgens were saying, I'm so confused now, I don't even understand my own story. And I think at one point I just left an issue of Robin to someone else to finish because I couldn't understand the story anymore. Thankfully, it only interrupted everything for 1 month. This wasn't an ongoing, long-term crossover. So we all just had to put up with it for 1 month. But it was, as you have read or suspect or heard, Grant Morrison run events were chaotic. And I'm not going to blame that on Grant. I'm going to blame it on his editors, who either indulged him or just used it as an opportunity to, horsewhip the rest of us, punish us for some unstated wrong we'd done them in the past. I don't know what the hell was going on there in 1 Million, but it was the opposite of how DC usually ran things. The last big crossover I was involved with was Last Laugh, which was largely run by myself and Scott Beatty, and it was in the days following Denny O'Neill's retirement. And sometimes it was a bit of an uphill battle, but it wasn't done in a retreat fashion or anything else. Scott and I laid out the original the core miniseries, which was going to be released in weekly installments. And then the high concept of Last Laugh, if you've never read it, is that the Joker escapes from prison after having poisoned all of the convicts with a formula that Jokerized them, that basically made them unpredictable psychotics like himself. Even made them pale and gave them green hair if they had hair, and that was the conceit, and the idea was that you didn't have to follow our storyline or anything else, but this gave you an opportunity for 1 month in your books to have your hero face a Jokerized version of a villain they had never met before. And we thought that a lot of writers and artists would really dig this idea, because it's just basically it's a one-shot story, and you go wild. And the idea is very simple. Your hero meets a villain they've never met before, but this villain has been amped up by being Jokerized. And, sort of a musical chairs kind of deal. And so we wrote this out, and then Scott and I spent one very long day at DC meeting with each editor of all the titles to tell them about the concept and explain it to them. And it's very simple, it's very painless. This is what your creators would have to do. Personally, something this high concept, I've been involved in stories like this, crossovers created by other people, and I thought it was cool. I get to do this one-off story that sort of either breaks the rules or turns things on its head for my lead character. That's cool. That's cool. Some editors liked the idea. Others were either resistant or indifferent. And a lot of creators did not take the opportunity presented to them, and they simply had their hero meet a villain that their hero had met many times before, only Jokerized. And to me, that wasn't as interesting as meeting a brand new villain, a villain they had never encountered before, Jokerized. So, but that's how it was done. It was basically, there was no summit, there was no retreat. It was all done in one day, all done through editors. We never got to speak to any creators on it, and we never received any correspondence from creators. Nobody asked any questions or the rest of it. But that said, it sold very well. The Last Laugh crossover outsold Our World at War, which was the previous cross-country company crossover, which had been highly promoted and highly pushed. This was going to be huge. And then our humble little 1 month stunt outsold them quite a bit. And I'm still happy. Scott and I are still very happy with our core miniseries, how the story of it, how it turned out. And then also, I got to write, the issues. My regular comics at the time, Robin, Birds of Prey, Detective, I got to write them, within this crossover. So that was a lot of fun. So anyway, that's that about the difference between Marvel and DC, the stark difference between Marvel and DC when it came to approaching crossovers. Okay, I should say in the days of Jim Shooter, it was different. But I wasn't involved in any Jim Shooter inspired crossovers. Hey, if you haven't subscribed, please do so. If you have, thank you so much. It really helps build this channel, and that's all I'm going to say about it this week. Kenny Todd, when you wrote the Punisher Batman crossover, why do another one with Asbats? Was there a friendly rivalry between you and Denny? What did he think of yours? What did you think of his? Personally, I enjoyed yours better, but I did like his as well. Well, basically, the idea is that we were going to have two Batman meets Punisher crossovers, one published by DC and run out of DC, one published by Marvel and run out of Marvel. Now, for some reason, Archie Goodwin was my editor, even though he was at DC. He was the editor of my Marvel project. Of course, Archie Goodwin had long been associated with Marvel, so I don't think anybody questioned But the thing is that each company wanted a bite of the apple, basically. Um, as Tom DeFalco always said when it came to crossovers, what's in it for us? And that's what anybody has to say. What's in it for us? And what was in it for Marvel was to get the best selling of the two books, because it was Johnny Romita Jr. on the art. I think Dale Keown. Was it Dale Keown or was it Barry? I forget his last name. Who did? I can't remember. Barry Kitson, I think, did the Asbats. So you had Johnny Romita Jr. and the real Batman. This was Bruce Wayne Batman. It wasn't Asbats, and I think that helped sell it. And I think Marvel promoted theirs more than DC did. And there was no real friendly rivalry. I mean, Denny was going to write his. I mean, thankfully, he wrote the Asbats one. I didn't want to write the Asbats one, and I wanted to work with Johnny again. So it, you know, I it, yeah. I would have written the Asbats thing differently than Denny did. I didn't always agree with how Denny approached things, but I'm not saying he was wrong. It's just we'd had a different approach, but mine was like just balls out. Punisher meets Batman. I had so many things I wanted to do with this story. It had been I had pushed for a Batman Punisher crossover for 2 years, and couldn't convince Tom DeFalco to go forward with it. Don Daly and I would routinely bring up doing a Batman Punisher crossover because, it was a natural fit. I was writing both characters, so it just seemed like, hey, this would work out, and it'd be a big enough event. We could get Johnny Jr. back, and eventually it was DC who made the approach. Hey, why don't we do this? Batman is like super popular now. Punisher is popular now. Let's get this together. And so that's how that happened. And I was so happy to have Archie as editor. I don't know what Denny ever thought of the story. He generally liked my stuff. Archie really liked this story, although he said he cringed at the Joker's joke at the beginning of the story about the guy being yellow. But I couldn't resist that gag. But Denny did remark. He did remark on the ultimate encounter between Punisher and Joker, where Joker psychoanalyzes both Batman and Punisher as a means of stalling the Punisher from killing him, buying time. And Denny simply said, "You think a lot about this stuff." That was, which I found was a high compliment. He enjoyed the sequence, but he wasn't going to come right out and say that. He just said, "You think a lot about this stuff." So, twin spin. What do you know? Kenny Todd again. Do you think Batman and Wonder Woman would make a good couple? It's been teased here and there. Does Batman deserve to be happy, even for a little while? They did it with Earth 2 Batman. Does Batman want to be happy? That's the question. You can't make someone happy if they don't want to be happy. You can, to quote my good pal Greg Quapis once again, you can decide to be happy. But I don't think Batman wants that. He doesn't think he deserves it. And I don't see him as a good fit for Wonder Woman. On her side, yeah, he seems kind of troubled and complex. Maybe I can fix him. Women like that kind of guy. But I don't think it would take too long to figure out, you can't fix Bruce. He's not going to change for anybody. He thinks he's fine just the way he is. And also just the disparity. I mean, she's, basically a goddess. I mean, talk about punching above your weight. Superman and Wonder Woman I could see because they're kind of on par with one another. Also, Batman doesn't want help from anybody. I'm not saying he's sexist. He doesn't want help from men or women. He wants to do it on his own. And it kind of messes with the whole Batman thing if his girlfriend is this super powered, Amazonian mythic figure. It's just not a good fit. And I don't see him having a lot of time for her. He's kind of a busy guy. He's got his hobbies. So, that's not good. Not that she has plenty of time, but she seems to have more, me time than, a lot of the heroes. Between her adventures, she's kicking back a little bit more. But Batman's schedule is pretty much 24/7. And, that's not a good way to do a relationship. Also, it's a long, it's a long distance relationship. She's all the way out there on Themyscira. He's in Gotham. He ain't leaving Gotham. He ain't traveling to see his girlfriend. Where do they meet in the middle? I don't know. What's in the middle between Amazon Island and Gotham? So Asgard? I don't know. Oh, triple spin. What an honor for you. Uh, Kenny Todd again. I'm curious what you thought about the remake of Day of the Jackal. I really was shocked to have seen Bruce Willis as a bad guy, but I loved his performance. It did make me watch the original, loved it. Why would you remake this? Day of the Jackal, the original, with the actor whose name is escaping me right now in the lead, is just such a wonderfully, deliberately paced story. It's even though it's directed by an American director, Franklin Schaffner, James Fox, Franklin Schaffner, it's paced so much like a French thriller of the period, like a Melville French thriller, and really works, really cranks up the suspense without any hysteria. Now, I have never seen the remake. I largely stayed away from it because it was a DreamWorks. It was an early DreamWorks production, and I found their stuff to be very tepid. DreamWorks really only had success when they teamed with another studio, but these early efforts by DreamWorks were kind of lukewarmly received by critics and the audience. They were kind of like half-baked remakes, half-baked kind of thriller ideas. Their idea of what a Michael Bay movie would look like if it had no testosterone. So I kind of stayed away from it. Although I will watch it now because I did get a copy. I'm a big Bruce Willis fan, and I will check it out and tell you what I think. You inspired me to find it and put it in the to watch list. So I'll share my opinion anon. Bill Robertson. I was at Happy Valley Comics and Collectibles Con in State College, Pennsylvania last week and discovered even more of your old epic work, Car Warriors. I found the first 2 issues in some 50-cent long boxes. I vaguely recognized the logo from seeing it sporadically over the years and opened an issue to check it out. I was very pleased to see your name in the credits. The next day, I found the entire 4 issues in fantastic condition for $2. Deal. So far, I've read the first 2, and it's a great story. It has similarities to Law Dog, and I wonder if they maybe originated from the same idea. Yeah, Car Warriors was based on a Steve Jackson game, strategy game. Guess what you call a board game, role play game. I don't know. Anyway, I never played the game, but they gave me a list of characters and the concept, and it's pretty much Death Race 2000. And so I jumped on it, and it was me and Steve Dillon, who I'd never worked with before, and Phil Winslade on inks. And Phil did these fantastic covers for it. And I like Steve Dillon's work a lot, but man, I'm a huge Phil Winslade fan. To this day, I'm loving Lawless, which is running in 2000 AD or Judge Dredd magazine. I don't know which. And but yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was very Road Warrior-ish, but there was a lot of like dark humor, and it was a blast to work on. And it was kind of, in a weird way, my first shot at The Simpsons, because I created a family modeled after The Simpsons called the Wysockies. And there was Homer and Marge and Bart, and Lisa and Maggie, sort of stand-ins for them, and some of the humor and borrowed relationships, probably a little subtle, but they were the inspiration for this average American family who decides to enter this death race um, in their family station wagon. And I remember the race runs across the state of Michigan. They have to cross the oh God, I forget the name of the bridge that goes up to the Upper Peninsula. But that was the setting because I didn't want to do the usual roadway or desert setting or anything like that. I wanted to do something different. And but it was fun. It was a lot of fun to write. Carl Potts was my editor on it, and he basically ran interference between me and Steve Jackson, who kept trying to, who wanted me to make changes in the story, and Carl just basically said, just leave Chuck alone, which I'm eternally grateful for. That I was allowed to write this without a lot of interference from the licensor. Was it an inspiration for Law Dog? No, I like writing badass guys and badass cars. A Law Dog's car travels between dimensions. It's big, it's a big ass American muscle car. And yeah, I mean, there was no direct correlation between the two. I just think, guys in really, bad motor scooters are, real macho guys in big, powerful cars is kind of cool, and obviously the American public thinks so. Burt Reynolds based a whole career on it. Woolwich. My question is about Mickey Mouse. Now that he's out of copyright, what can you do with this character? Considering Disney's deep pockets, what would you do with him? I assume by deep pockets, you're referring to Walt Disney lawyers who, just sort of hang on hooks until they're needed, until they're unleashed, they're let out of their cages to go after innocent people and sue the living daylights out of them. Yeah, the Steamboat Bill, the first Mickey Mouse cartoon, has fallen into public domain, but only the elements within it. We see Pete, but Pete isn't Peg-Leg Pete in this, as he was in the comic strips. So it's going to be Pete with two feet. You got Mickey, you got Minnie, and that's pretty much it. There's no Goofy, there's no Donald. So you would be restricted to this. Not a very attractive prospect for me. Were I write Mickey Mouse, I would go back to the Floyd Gottfredson kind of portrayal of Mickey Mouse as a sort of brash adventurer type character back when Mickey had a personality, and I would want to do that, but it's already been done, hasn't it? Gottfredson was, the final word on this stuff. I mean, why go back and do anything? You're not gonna do anything better than what he did, and he did plenty with the daily and Sunday strips. So it's not something I would be attracted to. And besides, Louis Trondheim is doing a series of Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck graphic novels in Europe that are just amazing, and it takes Mickey back to those days when he had a personality, when he was brash and adventurous, and devil may care kind of character, and funnier, and like I said, had a personality. So he's kind of covering that beat to doing some amazing comic albums out of Italy and France and places like that. And some of them are reprinted here. I suggest you look for Mickey's Craziest Adventure, and then there's a companion Donald Duck volume to that, and they kind of go together. The story continues in the Donald edition, and just awesome stuff. Just excellent comics. David, a lot of fans of noir pulp genre are of the opinion that these characters are best set in their original time period and cannot be successfully adapted to the modern era. I disagree. I think the issue is that these characters were never allowed to evolve. The problem with keeping noir-type pulp characters in the traditional era is that the bad guys are all played out. No one cares about Al Capone-style gangsters anymore. Nazis have been done to death. Mad scientists will always work, but the science itself needs to be kept up to date. I believe that a character such as a Shadow is capable of being a great modern-day era character. What is your opinion? Can it be done? I think it could be done. Not by James Patterson, but it could be done. But I wouldn't want to do it. I like these characters set in the settings they're in. And I think you're wrong. I think there's a lot more to explore about the 1930s. I mean, I wrote for an anthology, I wrote a novella or short story of the spider, who was like a shadow type character, except a lot meaner. Um, and I wrote it in the style of, I can't remember the name of the author. It was a female author. I can't remember her name, but I tried to write it in her style, and she was a big best selling author in the 30s, and I tried to ape that style. That was the fun of writing it for me. Was writing a a pulp character in a sort of pastiche of a highbrow literature style. Uh, so that was fun for me, but I kept it in period because I'm sorry, but Nazis are played out. Hey, I mean, scratch the surface on Nazis. I could, if you told me that all your bad guys had to be Nazis for the rest of your writing career, I'd be like, yeah, bring it on. Because these guys were, they were designed to be bad guys. Look, the guy's got a skull on his hat. Uh, they, they, they literally, were created in the image of a comic opera villain with their costuming and symbology and the stuff they did was pure supervillain bad guy stuff. So trying to kill off large portions of the population of the planet, sort of qualifies you as a supervillain. So I don't think they're played out at all. Still interesting, and the same goes for 1930s gangsters. Who doesn't like a period set gangster film? I can't think of a period set gangster film that ever lost money. Everybody loves this stuff, and it. I think there's more stories to be told within this. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to have the Shadow going up against. I could see the Shadow going up against globalists. I could see the Shadow taking down Klaus Schwab or Bill Gates. But were I to write these characters, I would definitely want to write them in period. That would be the big attraction for me. The cars, the way the people dressed, everything about it. But you got to be true to the period. You've got to explore the period. To me, the best version of these was, they would look like they were done then. They would look like an old movie, like when Mike Kaluta and Russ Heath did that shadow graphic novel at I believe Marvel with Denny O'Neil writing. I mean, it looked like a comic done in the period, which was a lot of the allure of it. So yeah, I would. I will have to agree to disagree on this. Slade Oron. What do you mean by high concept story? I've heard this term before, but I wanted to know your take. Also, are there then low concept stories? A high concept story is like one sentence. Frankenstein meets Wolfman. That was the elevator pitch. And they're like, yeah, that's a great idea. Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. And that's your high concept. That's what you sell to the audience. Other, easy ones are Die Hard at a Hockey Stadium. Sudden Death with Jean-Claude Van Damme. I mean, that was the pitch. Die Hard at a Hockey Stadium. Yes, here's money. Go make that. The most dangerous man in the world, someone stupid enough to kill his dog. And there you got John Wick. I mean, that was the pitch. Guy gets his dog killed and stuntmen go crazy. A family makes their young son move into a bomb shelter with them in the early 60s, and they live there believing the world has been destroyed by a nuclear annihilation until the son goes out to get supplies and realizes that nothing bad happened as his parents had assured him, and romance ensues. Blast from the past. It's a high concept. It's a simple idea that could go in almost any direction, and most high concept ideas can be a comedy, they can be straight up action, they can be straight up drama. There's a million different approaches, but you're coming off a very clean, pure sometimes single sentence description of what's to happen in the movie, what the conflict is, or what the hero's desires are, whatever. It's all there in one sentence. A lot of times they'll shorthand these. It's quite infamously recently, a Star Wars director said that her Star Wars would be Kill Bill meets Frozen. And they seem to like that kind of thing in Hollywood. I always joke, when they say, "What's your story?" I say, "Well, it's kind of Die Hard 2 meets Die Hard 3." Um, so, as simple as you can make it, because you're dealing with simple-minded people. I remember a number of times, there was a very earnest producer who's extraordinarily successful now in TV. Guys like, a stud in producing stuff for network television. But at the time, he loved Law Dog, and he wanted to produce Law Dog as a movie, but he couldn't get anybody to greenlight it because he couldn't get them to understand the concept of parallel universes. So I assume, Law Dog is in a way low concept. Of course, today it's nothing but multiverse stories, and recently saw a parallel universe story nominated for Best Picture. It may even have won. I don't pay attention to the Oscars. But, yeah, are there low concept stories? Yeah, there's a few. There's a few out there. It's not to say if it's not high concept, it's low concept. But it's either high concept or it's not, basically. There's not really a low concept movie. There may be movies where they kind of lose the concept, where there wasn't really a concept to begin with. Maybe an agenda in place of a concept. But there you go. David Jordan again. Can I give you a few directors and you tell us what your favorite and least favorite movies they've done are? Anything else you want to add? Okay. If we're looking at Michael Mann, it's got to be Last of the Mohicans. And I'm being honest with you. I'm generally basing this on how often do I rewatch these movies by these certain directors. Which movie by which director do I watch more than others? A lot of times when you're asked these questions, you're like, well, let me give a highbrow answer or whatever. And you'll talk about, oh, I love this movie, but you haven't seen it in 10 years, because you're trying to show off. But Last Mohicans, I rewatch this at least once a year. And I think it's Michael Mann's absolute masterpiece. And I'll bet you anything, if you sat Michael Mann down and got a couple of drinks in him, he'd admit this was his masterpiece too. Not that there's not anything to be proud of about this movie. The Insider is probably the only Michael Mann movie I really just didn't enjoy. It kind of takes talk about a low concept movie. It kind of takes a 60-minute segment and expands it into movie length with Russell Crowe and Al Pacino. And I just never bought Russell Crowe as, I never buy him as the guy who's put upon, not really reacting, kind of a little bit wimpy. I didn't buy the conspiracy. It all seemed just too vague and lots of smoke and mirrors. It wasn't like direct and in your face like a Michael Mann movie. Michael Mann tends to be somewhat stylistic, and this was all style over substance. And even the style I thought was kind of iffy. For John Carpenter, The Thing, I like a lot of Carpenter movies. I'm a big fan, but this is the one I watch most often or rewatch most often. This one gets a watch at least once a year. It's a terrific adaptation of the original Who Goes There. And I like the other Thing movie too, the one from the 50s with Ken Tobey and Jim Arness. I'm a big fan of that one too. And I like the fact that both movies have an entirely different approach to the same subject matter. But yeah, it's got to be. And Ghost of Mars is probably Carpenter's weakest. Yeah, this is a low concept movie. I don't know what the hell was going on in this movie. I didn't know what it was supposed to be about. It just seemed to be everything but the kitchen sink thrown in. I think that it was restricted on budget. I think Carpenter had ideas that he simply couldn't do because the budget wasn't there. Carpenter was always fighting budget, and a master at fighting budget. I mean, Escape from New York was made on such a shoestring. If you ever watch, if you go on YouTube and watch how they did the miniature work and computer work on Escape from New York, and the corners they cut and the stuff they got away with that looks great on screen, but it shouldn't have. But they knew how to film it, and it's really imaginative approach to doing, big scale, big budget effects, on a peanut butter and jelly budget. And he's just a terrific filmmaker. He just never had like the super blockbuster huge-o hit that would have lifted him up into the Spielberg, George Lucas range, which he should have been in, because he's such a creative guy. But you got to admire, man. That's a working man's ethic. I'm gonna put every dime on the screen that I can. I'm gonna find a way to do this, even though we don't have the money to do it. Yeah, Walter Hill, Long Riders. This is one I watch most often. I like a lot of Walter Hill movies. I'm not as big a Walter Hill fan as a lot of people are. I think he's kind of, sketchy. Some movies are really great. Some movies are not so great. Some movies are just sort of like, yeah, okay, I guess that was entertaining enough. I think he's, I don't know. There's a certain level of, you sort of get the idea of his style and his taste and where he's going to go with every story. Long Riders, I think, sort of defied that. And also, talk about a high concept. We're going to do the Jesse James Cole Younger brothers gang movie with actual brothers. The studio must have loved that because it did all the marketing for them. But in case you didn't know that, all of the characters playing brothers in this movie were actual brothers. The Carradines, the Quaids, and others. The leads, the Keaches. And boy, my memory's shot today. Walter Hill's least for me is the driver. Ryan O'Neal was so hopelessly miscast in this movie, and this should have been one of Hill's best. I mean, it's about a getaway driver, but it's just not good. And Ryan O'Neal I never buy him. You can't buy him as a badass. You can't buy him as a tough guy. When he displays anger, it's like, he didn't get the table he wanted at Spago. He didn't get the grade he wanted in English Lit. He didn't make the dean's list. I'm so mad. I'm so very angry. And that's like the level of rage this guy can summon up. He's not what you think of as a noirish character. He's too much of a department store mannequin. In the right roles, he's good, but let's admit it, Ryan O'Neal never had much range. And sadly, it's a waste of Isabella Gianni, who is not probably largely unknown to American audiences, hugely popular superstar actress in France and in Europe, sort of wasted here. And I remember seeing this movie with a friend, and as we're watching it, we were recasting it. We were recasting Ryan O'Neal. It was, Harrison Ford, Bruce Dern, it's like anybody but Ryan O'Neal. For Ridley Scott, it's Black Hawk Down. I watch this at least once, sometimes twice a year. This is an amazing movie about the Mogadishu, the disastrous mission in Mogadishu to take out a Somali warlord. And it's an amazing movie because Scott, manages to leap across a huge ensemble cast and keep you aware of where they are in the story, both geographically and character arc wise. And he keeps the action going. This is one of the most action-packed war dramas ever. Most of the running time of this movie is running and gunning, and I think it's a largely accurate portrayal. It's based on a terrific book, and unfortunately leaves out one of the best scenes in the book because I guess the studios were afraid of that particular scene, something that actually happened. Let me just say, it's how the American commander motivated the Pakistani troops to come to the rescue. Let's just say he was rather direct in an Alan West kind of way. Um, and the other amazing thing about this movie is I think this and Full Metal Jacket are like the textbook of how to block out a complex firefight sequence. You're as chaotic and manic as the action is in this movie, you're never ever lost. You always know where you are, and even though it's it's quick edits, it's cross cutting, it's this, it's that. It's just spectacular from beginning to end, and it's the one I watch over and over and over again. Um, my least favorite Ridley Scott movie, and I like a lot of Ridley Scott movies, is Kingdom of Heaven. I think Orlando Bloom, just like Ryan O'Neal, was hopelessly miscast. Orlando Bloom is a very good actor, and I think he's got a lot of range, but I don't think he had a lot of help from Scott on this movie. And he pretty much just looks sad or pissed off for the whole running time of the film. He never like changes his facial expression very much. He's just dour and unrelatable. Nobody can be that sad for that long. Like you can't just be sad 20. I don't care what happened to you. And I've met people who went through traumatic, horrible experiences, but you would never know that a few years afterwards, from their actions, from the way they would act. Their personalities still emerged. Their personalities were still intact. And I think this was just a one-dimensional character. Yes, the action's amazing, and yes, I have seen the director's cut, which I do like a bit better, but not much better. And I think in its initial release, this movie had the unfortunate. It's weird because it had the unfortunate. I mean, Black Hawk Down came out post 9/11, and it's just a straight up war movie in which the enemies are Muslims, uh, and there was no need to equivocate about that. By the time Kingdom of Heaven is made, we're further away from 9/11, and I think the studios felt there was a need to equivocate for the Saracens in this movie. They wouldn't just be straight up bad guys. And the original feature film version, it's glaringly obvious that they're trying to really hard to make both sides seem equitable, seem the same. Two sides of a different coin, or two different sides of the same coin. And I think the movie largely failed because of that. Because who am I rooting for here? The director's cut fixes some of that, and the historical record is that Saladin did honor his promise to allow the Crusaders to leave Jerusalem. But yeah, it's just a movie I just don't care for. It looks gorgeous, but I just don't care for it as much as I like so many of his other movies. Now his brother Tony, it's got to be Last Boy Scout. Of all the movies that Tony Scott made that I really like True Romance. I really like a number of others. Last Boy Scout is a movie that, for some reason, I went to see over and over again at the theater when it was in release. I must have seen this thing 6 times on the big screen. It's worth a watch every year. Shane Black's insane screenplay, sort of send up of the private eye genre, which he's done so many times, but never did as well in this movie. This movie's a zany and goofy and has so many terrific lines, so many terrific action set pieces, and it really fits Scott's super slick style of filmmaking, and great chemistry between all of the lead actors in it, and it's one that's just for me compulsively watchable. His weakest, and probably everybody in the world's going to agree with me, is Domino. I don't know what the idea behind this movie was. I don't know where it went wrong. It's supposed to be based on a true story. Not 1 second of this film feels authentic or real or true. Keira Knightley isn't believable for even 2 frames of this movie as a freelance bounty hunter and / fashion model. I never looked into the real, quote unquote, real story behind this movie. It's supposed to be factual. I can't believe it had to be like some public relations person's fevered dream that any of these events were created. But yeah, it doesn't work for a second. And Scott sort of goes on overdrive with the cross-cutting and you know, fade outs and double exposures and all the rest. It's a mess. It's just a heartless, joyless mess. For Howard Hawks, boy, it is hard to choose. My favorite Howard Hawks movie. A film critic that I read regularly, he wrote that when people say, if you had to go to a desert island, what movies would you take with you? And he said, I would take every Howard Hawks movie with me. And he says, and I'd be good because I'd have every genre. I'd have crime, I'd have comedy, I'd have romance, I'd have westerns, I'd have action adventure. And he's right. Hawks excelled at every single genre. And of all the movies that Bringing Up Baby, His Gal Friday, I mean, over and over and over again, I'll watch these movies. But Rio Bravo is probably the one. I think every 6 months I put this movie in. It's sort of my default movie. Like, I don't know what I want to watch. I'll put on Rio Bravo. Loved this movie since I was a kid. And I just dig it a whole lot. John Wayne, Dean Martin, Ricky Nelson, Walter Brennan, just a great ensemble cast in a really fun Western that's just expertly made from beginning to end. Just a terrific movie. Hawks' worst is Man's Favorite Sport. It's his attempt to do a screwball comedy, except it's set in the 60s, and sort of the days of the screwball comedy are over with. Hawks has kind of lost his touch here with the timing. The casting of Rock Hudson is poor. Rock Hudson was coming off a huge success, being in a number of movies with Doris Day. And I think Hawks thought, well, I'm going to work into that genre. He's teamed with Paula Prentice. And it's it's just a mess. It's a Doris Day movie without Doris Day or any of the charm or pacing or fun or froth of a Doris Day comedy. So yeah, he was nearing the end of his career, and he just would have been better retiring or just keep making westerns. Because he kept, I think after this he just stuck to westerns, which is what he should have done. Hey, one more thing. Last time out, I believe it was last time out, somebody talked about writing for the trade, and there's an element that I forgot to mention. Writing for the trade, back in the 90s, we were very aware trade paperbacks were the thing. They were with us. And most of our comics we were writing for the core titles were going to be collected. Generally a year later, they would be collected into trade volumes. So our editors began to say, start thinking about the trades. In other words, start thinking about, 6-issue arcs, or the number of arcs that would fit into 6 issues. Don't end your 6th issue on a cliffhanger. Try to wrap things up, either through your one-shot stories or whatever, so that they fit nicely story-wise into trades. And a lot of writers took that to mean, well, I can pad my stories out, or I can leave all the action till the end of the story. I'm just writing one big long story, which, as I said previously, was a big mistake, because you still have to make the reader of that monthly installment happy. The monthly installment has to be good. It has to stand on its own as a piece of quality entertainment, and not just part of a greater whole. Not just sort of a fill-in issue where it's all exposition or setup for something. You've got to have every comic book story, mainstream superhero action type comic book story has to have setups and payoffs within each installment of however long your arc is. And I think when some writers heard writing for the trade, they just sort of thought, well, I don't have to do that anymore. But you do. Oh, but the aspect that I left out was the trade allowed you to properly dramatize things. There was no reason, you had no reason to shortcut anything, because you were writing a longer form story. In most cases, you had time for those moments, those Tony Soprano going to feed the ducks moments, character building moments, or dramatized moments. And an example I always use is the first issue of Commandi by Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby created Commandi over a weekend. And he had a title canceled and he had to replace it. Jack, we're canceling this, but we still have a slot open at the printers. If you can come up with something over the weekend, we'll fill it with this new #1. So he comes up with Commandi, and it's wonderful. It's a fantastic concept. I love Commandi. The only thing about Commandi I don't like is his origin is so brief. Kirby is in such a rush to get to his main concept of a young boy emerging in a post-apocalyptic world populated by talking animals. He's such a rush that he sort of gives short shrift to, where does Commandi come from? Where, what's the precursors to this story? Where did the story really begin? And see, if Jack was writing for the trades or had more time, he would have spent that whole first issue on Commandi's background, and then ended it with him meeting his first talking animals. But Jack didn't know how long the series was going to run. Jack didn't know anything about trade paperbacks. They were going to be decades in the future, and so he did what he did. But but I would say, had he known he was writing a longer form story, he would have taken more time, more care with the beginnings of Commandi, and before the main events of the story. Hey, if you have suggestions, questions, whatever, pictures of your dog or your cat, or you just want to talk, contact me at brunobookstore@gmail.com. brunobookstore@gmail.com. It's the most reliable way to reach me. And if I can remind you once again, book 12 of Levon Cade is currently out, doing well. People seem to be liking it. And Levon's Trade, the movie, starts filming in just a few weeks. I keep checking IMDb to see the progress, and they've hired everybody, even the drivers. So this looks like it's really going to happen. So it's set up to start filming with Jason Statham in just a couple of weeks. So I'm excited. I hope you are too. And that's it for me this week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for liking. And thank you, if you have, for sharing this with all of your friends and family so we can build this channel and keep those questions coming. I'll see you down the road.